I'm Margaret Colson, 59 years old. At my son's wedding, the one I quietly funded to the tune of $55,000, my new daughter-in-law stood up mid-reception, glass raised, and announced to 200 guests that the kindest thing I could do for the marriage was disappear from it. People actually laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. My son stared at the tablecloth like it had personally betrayed him. I didn't say a single word back to her. I stood up, walked past the gift table, and dialed a number I hadn't planned on using that night. 20 minutes later, 3 things were already in motion, and by the following Monday, my son understood exactly what his silence at that microphone had cost him. But to understand why one sentence from a 26-year-old bride could undo 9 years of my restraint in under a minute, you have to go back to the day I decided money would be how I said, "I love you," because it was the only language I had left. People who've known me for years will tell you, I'm not somebody who makes scenes. I've never once raised my voice at a family dinner. I reconcile my checkbook to the penny every single month, out of habit more than necessity at this point. So when I tell you it took exactly one sentence from a 26-year-old I'd known for barely 2 years to undo 9 years of very deliberate restraint, I need you to understand it wasn't really about that sentence. It was about everything standing quietly behind it. Every unasked question, every automatic transfer, every time I told myself love doesn't keep a ledger, right up until the night I found out someone else in that family had been keeping one the entire time, and I wasn't the one it favored. This is Calm Drama Stories. If you've ever bankrolled a family that only remembered you when the bill was due, you're in the right place. Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Because this story does not end the way that bride expected. 10 years ago, my husband Walter collapsed at a job site, an aneurysm, gone before the ambulance arrived. He was 53. I was 50. Our son Nathan was 24, 2 years out of college, working retail, and driving a car with 190,000 miles on it. Everyone assumes grief is quiet crying and long walks. Mine was 3 ring binders. I ran a small tax and bookkeeping business out of our den for 2 decades, 5 employees, a loyal client base across the whole township. So when the funeral home tried to upsell me on a casket package, I asked for the itemized invoice and watched the price drop $900 in real time. When the pension office misplaced Walter's paperwork twice, I called every single morning at 8:45 until they found it. Numbers were the one thing that still behaved. Walter used to tease that I loved a reconciled account statement the way other women loved perfume. He wasn't wrong, and here's what I didn't understand back then. Sitting in a suddenly enormous house with a folder where a husband used to be, when the person you talk to every night disappears, you start talking in whatever language is left in your hands. Mine was money. Nathan would call, and I'd hear his father's laugh tucked inside his voice, and whatever he needed, I said yes before he'd even finished asking. The first check I wrote him was 5 days after the funeral, car repairs, $900. It would not be close to the last one. My son is an easy person to love, genuinely. He remembers everyone's coffee order, charms every waitress, could talk his way into 3 golf invitations in a single afternoon, all from strangers. Pure Walter. But here's the thing, Nathan never actually asked for money. He'd mention it. A Sunday call about baseball would drift, 20 minutes into the landlord's raising rent again. Can you believe that? Followed by a sigh and a change of subject, and by Tuesday, the transfer was already done. He never had to lower himself to ask. I never got the dignity of being asked. It just happened, quiet as a furnace clicking on. At my office, I had a standard lecture for overspending clients. If it's not written down where you can see it, it's not love, it's a leak. I gave that speech at least once a week, then drove home and wired my son $500 for a guy's trip he'd casually mentioned. I balanced other people's books for a living and never once totaled the one column that would have told me the truth about my own. I still remember the first Christmas without Walter clearest of anyone. I'd bought his gift out of pure habit before I caught myself, a set of fishing lures he'd have loved, and Nathan found me standing in the garage with the bag still in my hand, not crying exactly, just frozen. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just took the bag gently, set it on the workbench, and hugged me for a long time without saying anything. He was 24, terrified, doing his absolute best to hold together a family he never asked to inherit the weight of. I think that's the year something in me got permanently rewired. I decided that if I couldn't bring his father back, I could at least guarantee my son never lay awake the way I'd watched Walter lie awake near the end, doing math on a legal pad at 2 a.m. I kept that promise faithfully for 9 years. I just never once stopped to ask what keeping it was quietly costing me. 7 years ago, a collections agent called me directly. Nathan silent in the background, with a total that made my chest tighten. $44,000 across 5 cards and an SUV loan he had no business signing for. He was 27, sitting at my kitchen table, ears burning red, looking exactly the way he did at 10 years old after he cracked the Peterson's fence with a bike he wasn't supposed to be riding. I paid it off that Monday, but I did something that surprised him because of something Walter always said about handshake deals. Paper keeps love honest. I drew up an actual promissory note. Principal, interest at the federal rate, payable on demand, the real thing. I'm a CPA. If I'm going to love someone financially, the file is going to be spotless. He signed it at that same table without reading past the second line, grinned, said, "You got it, Mom. Send me the bill." And we ordered Chinese food. I sat across from him that night holding 2 feelings at once, the way you sometimes can without them touching. Relief, real relief, watching some of the shame lift off his shoulders. And underneath it, something colder. The quiet realization that my son had just signed a binding legal document the same way he signed up for that SUV loan, without reading a word of it, trusting a friendly face over the fine print. I told myself that was a worry for another day. Every December after, I quietly forgave that year's interest, exactly as tax law allows, and filed each letter away in a folder he never knew existed. The following year, his wrecked credit meant no bank would touch him for mortgage, and rent was crushing him. A modest colonial went up for sale 12 minutes from my place. I walked through it alone before making an offer. Empty rooms, hardwood floors that needed refinishing, an old oak tree out back that must have been standing since before the house was built, and stood in the empty kitchen trying to picture my son's whole life happening inside those walls. I bought it outright, my name alone on the deed, not out of stinginess, but because I just watched my son shovel himself into a $44,000 hole with pure optimism. I told him plainly, "My house, you pay rent, and when things are stable, we talk deed like adults." $900 a month, when the going rate on that block was $2,400. Here's what nobody, not Nathan, not my sister Renee, not a living soul, ever knew, what I did with that $900 every month. I'd opened a separate account the week he moved in. Every rent check landed in my checking account, and every month, without fail, I moved it, untouched, into that quiet account with his name on the file. He thought he was paying me rent. He was actually paying himself a future. He just didn't know it yet. 5 years. 60 payments. $900 at a time. $54,000, sitting there like a gift wrapped so early I nearly forgot which drawer I'd hidden it in. I'd sit with my coffee on the first of every month, watch the number tick upward, and imagine the day I'd finally hand it to him. A wedding, maybe. A grandchild. Some ordinary Tuesday, when he'd ask how I was doing before asking me for anything. My sister called it a safety net. The truth is sharper than that. I think I was quietly building evidence, a number I could point to one day and say, "See, I loved you this whole time. It's right here in black and white." As if love were something you could keep in an escrow account. As if my son would someday audit my heart, and I desperately wanted to pass. 2.5 years ago, Nathan called with a lightness in his voice I hadn't heard since before his father died. "Mom, I met someone." Her name was Chloe Ashford, 25, worked in hospitality events. The first time she stepped into my house, she admired the crown molding before she said a word to me. I wanted so badly to like her. She asked politely about our family over that first dinner, and I gave her the honest version. Walter, the aneurysm, the years of slowly rebuilding. She nodded along at all the right moments, but her eyes had already drifted past me, cataloging the silver in the cabinet behind my chair. Then she gave me her own family in one smooth, well-worn paragraph. Her father in furniture, her mother chairing charity boards across the county. A paragraph polished enough that it had clearly been delivered many times before, probably to people she considered far more important than a widowed accountant in reading glasses. Her eyes moved through the room differently than a guest's do, across my bookshelves, my china, the photographs on the mantel, the way an appraiser's eyes move, not the way a visitor's do. At dinner she lifted her glass toward Nathan and said, smiling, to self-made men. My son, sitting in a house I owned, driving on tires I had quietly financed that spring, said not one word to correct her. He toasted the man he'd apparently invented and drank. I laughed along politely, the way mothers do at nice dinners, but internally I thought, one person at this table is fictional, and I seem to be the only guest not voting for him. At the engagement party, Chloe's mother Vivian worked the patio like she was campaigning for office, telling everyone our two families adored Nathan, that he fit them perfectly. My sister Renee, ever the retired schoolteacher whisperer with a 30-foot voice, informed me their family furniture business had collapsed back in 2009 and the bank had taken their lake property. I told her to hush, but I'd already clocked the leased Audi, the country club membership they held but never seemed to use. What actually bothered me that night wasn't the Ashfords' finances. It was my son's pronouns. All evening, we're thinking of fall wedding. We love the idea of a vineyard. We really want live music. Every we had Chloe in it. None had me. A mother notices, precisely, the day she's edited from the inside of a sentence to the outside of it. The wedding bills arrived sideways, as they always did in our family. A phone call about the game would drift into the venue deposits due Friday, $13,000. Insane, right? And by Wednesday, it was wired. There was a group chat for wedding planning. I was not in it. Decisions reached me as finished announcements. By wedding week, my total contribution sat at $55,000. Then the wedding website went live. A page titled Our Journey, written in Chloe's voice, describing a self-made man who had hustled through his 20s, cleared all debt, bought his first home before 30. Directly below that sentence, a photograph of my house, my own oak tree glowing in the background. My home, used online as proof of a man I had personally financed into existence just 7 years earlier. I called my son, told him the page needed fixing or coming down entirely, and told him the harder truth. She deserves to know the real story before the wedding, not after. A long pause. Then, in the calm voice he uses on difficult clients, she knows, Mom. She just really doesn't like talking about money. Her family's strange about it. Please don't turn this into something. I sat on that sentence for 3 more weeks. A month before the wedding, there was a bridal shower at the country club Vivian's family technically belonged to but rarely visited, except, it seemed, for exactly this kind of occasion. I was seated with 3 of Chloe's coworkers I'd never met, all pleasant enough, none of them aware that the woman refilling their mimosas had quietly paid for the room they were sitting in. Vivian gave a toast that afternoon about watching Chloe find a family that truly understands what really matters in life. I clapped along with everyone else. I've become quite good at clapping along. Renee leaned over and murmured, just for me, does what matters happen to come with a routing number? I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud at my own future daughter-in-law's shower, which tells you exactly how far my sense of humor had traveled by that point. Somewhere just past exhaustion, bordering on despair. 2 weeks before the wedding, at a dinner at the Ashfords, I took a wrong turn looking for the bathroom and ended up in the back hallway, right as Vivian's voice, stripped of its usual polish, drifted from the kitchen. You smile Saturday, and you keep smiling after. We don't owe anybody a thing anymore. Say it back to me. And Chloe, small, obedient. I know, Mom. I remember. I stood there with my hand on the wall and did what I always do with fog. I put numbers to it. A family that lost everything in 2009 doesn't just lose the money. It loses the face. Vivian had clearly spent over a decade teaching her daughter that owing anyone anything is how you slowly bleed out. Every kindness a leash. Every giver, eventually a collector. I felt sorry for Chloe for exactly the length of that hallway. It explained a great deal and excused absolutely nothing. The small demotion started right after, like a slow leak. My toast disappeared. The timeline's just too tight. Margaret, you understand. The maid of honor kept hers. Vivian kept hers. The seating chart put me at table 11, right by the service entrance. The printed programs read, hosted by the Ashford family, with no mention of the woman whose caterer invoice was funding the dinner. 10 days before the wedding, my son sat at my kitchen table and circled the subject for a solid 20 minutes before landing it. Would I consider putting the house in both their names as a wedding gift, since it's basically theirs anyway, Mom? I recognized the sentence immediately for what it was, not greed, but a script. My son does not casually say basically theirs about a house he pays a fraction of market rent on. Someone had been feeding him that line, patiently, for months. I told him gently, big paperwork happens properly, after the honeymoon, with the taxes done right, not squeezed in between the cake tasting and the caterer's deposit. He nodded, relieved and disappointed at once, and drove back to the house I still owned. I made a very different appointment with my attorney, Harold Sims, a friend of Walter's since law school. I laid it all out on his desk. The note, the deed, the will, which at the time left everything to Nathan. Then I told him exactly what I wanted to do, and his eyebrows climbed. The plan, a cashier's check for $54,000, every dollar of rent Nathan had ever paid, finally coming home to him. The note, forgiven completely, stamped and signed. A written letter of intent to properly transfer the deed after the honeymoon. All of it sealed in one plain envelope, tucked into my clutch, to be quietly handed over at the reception. My gift to them both. Harold asked me the one question he's paid to ask. And if this girl is exactly who you suspect she is? I looked out his window for a long moment and said, then I'd rather find out while my name is still on the deed. But Harold, I really do want to be wrong. Harold walked me through every clause slowly, tapping his pen against the page the way he's done since he taught contracts part-time at the community college decades ago. He asked whether I wanted a witness present for the actual handoff at the reception, in case anyone ever questioned the sequence of events later. I told him no. This wasn't a transaction I needed to prove. It was a gift, and gifts don't need an audience. Only clean paperwork behind them, which his office would already have on record. He slid the folder across his desk and said, in 40 years of doing this, most people who walk in here angry want to punish somebody. You're one of the only people I've ever seen walk in generous and terrified in equal measure. I didn't have a response for that. I'm still not sure I do. I carried that envelope for 10 days. Not once did I imagine the version of that night where it never left my purse. I arrived at the estate 2 hours early, the way I arrive everywhere. 30 years of tax season deadlines have permanently ruined me for showing up unprepared. The grounds genuinely did look like $55,000. White chairs squared to a garden in full bloom, a 5-tier cake being leveled with a small precision tool by a woman I respected instantly, a cellist warming up beneath a floral arch walking that lawn in my mother-of-the-groom heels. I noticed something that should have told me everything hours before it actually did. Every vendor on the property kept finding their way to me. Not the bride. Not Vivian, hostess of hostesses. The ceremony itself was lovely, golden hour light. The cellist floating something soft over 200 guests, my son crying openly at the sight of his bride coming down the aisle. Underneath all the pretense, he was still the boy who'd carried his father's casket with his jaw locked tight, and a mother's eyes never fully turn off for that. I sat in the second row, not the first. That seat belonged to Vivian. With Renee's hand tight around mine, watching the videographer's lens sweep across every family face and slide right past me, the way a camera slides past an empty chair. At the reception, the same pattern continued. The florist needed a last-minute approval. The caterer had a dietary count question. The photographer confirmed the shot list per contract, with the person who'd actually signed it. Then the venue's event manager, clipboard in hand, found me at table 11 in a lull between songs and said, at exactly the volume that carries. Mrs. Coulson, we're finalizing the remaining balance tonight. Same card as the deposit, correct? Just need your signature. My seat that night was table 11, hard against the service entrance, close enough that every tray of food swinging through the door sent a gust of warm kitchen air across my shoulder. The place card read Margaret Carlson. Someone down the planning chain had never once bothered to check the spelling on a card my own caterer invoice was funding. I corrected it myself with a pen before I sat down. If the evening intended to misfile me, it could at least misfile me accurately. I signed. Right there, in front of everyone. My name, my card, for my own son's wedding. I watched Vivian go rigid, watched her lean in and whisper to her daughter, watched Chloe's expression shift. And then Chloe crossed the room, taking the scenic route, collecting cheek kisses along the way, so it would look casual instead of deliberate. She didn't lower her voice. She raised it, tuned to exactly the volume that would carry to every table that had just heard the clipboard. Margaret, I'm so glad I found you. I've been wanting to say this all night. You've been so involved, truly, everyone can see that. So, genuinely, the kindest wedding gift you could give Nathan and me right now would be for you to step back. Completely. The gasp that followed was real. 100 small inhales, ice going still in glasses, the cellist's bow lifting mid-phrase. I looked past her, straight to my son, standing near the sweetheart table in his tuxedo. He looked down, turned his wedding band once, twice, studied the floor as though it needed structural inspecting. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. A person can live an entire lifetime inside 4 seconds. And there it was, the answer to the one question I had spent 9 years paying not to ask. If the money stopped, would anyone actually stay? What I felt wasn't the wound I expected. It was a strange, cold clarity, the exact feeling of finishing an audit and finding the number is bad, but at least, finally, it's true. I stood, set my untouched champagne down beside the place card, and walked, calm and unhurried, straight for the exit doors, phone already in my hand. Outside, under the string lights, with the party reduced to a silent aquarium behind the glass, I called Harold. I'm outside. I need to give you instructions. Call the note due in full, 30-day notice, installment option attached, so I'm not trying to drown him, just wake him. Draft a codicil removing Nathan and his new wife from the will. Begin moving the house into my living trust starting Monday. Then I phoned the bank's after-hours line and canceled every automatic transfer, the phone plan, the insurance, every small quiet kindness I'd been running on autopilot. Effective immediately. I'll be honest about something, because this story means nothing if I'm not. Standing there under those string lights, part of me was still waiting for my phone to buzz, for Nathan to storm out of that reception, furious on my behalf, ready to set things right in front of everyone who'd just heard his wife humiliate his mother. I gave that hope about 2 full minutes. Nobody came. The music never stopped. Somewhere behind that glass, my son was still standing in his tuxedo, still married, still silent. That silence answered a question I hadn't quite let myself ask out loud in 9 years. 20 minutes. Nothing legal truly finalizes in 20 minutes. No deed moves. No will updates between the toasts and the cake. But a decision forms all at once, the way a bone sets. The paperwork simply follows behind it like a shadow. I walked back inside. No scene, no microphone, that's her instrument, never mine. I found my son standing slightly apart from his bride, already pale. I put a hand on his sleeve and said quietly for him alone, the note's being called Monday. You should read what you actually signed. The house moves into my trust this week. Harold will put it all in writing, so nobody has to rely on memory. Mom, he said, in a voice I hadn't heard since he was 10 and standing over a broken fence. I gave his sleeve the same 2 pats I'd given him at his father's graveside and said, enjoy the rest of the party. It's already paid for. Then I walked out, past the gift table, my sealed envelope still riding untouched in my clutch. By Wednesday, the letters had landed. The note called due, gentle installment plans stapled behind it. A notice to the tenants. Not an eviction, 3 honest choices. Pay full market rent, buy the house at a fair independent appraisal with a real mortgage, or take 90 days to relocate. The deed moved into my trust. Vivian showed up at my door that Thursday in the full uniform, pearls, a fresh blowout, the smile she saves for board meetings, delivering a velvet-wrapped warning about how this would look to the family. Margaret, I think we can all agree emotions ran high Saturday. But lawyers, formal letters to your own son. Family doesn't invoice family, dear. I looked at her pearls and thought about the caterer's invoice sitting in my files, her daughter's name nowhere on it, mine on every single line.
Funny, I said.
I've been the invoice for 9 years. You've simply been reading my line items since the engagement party. She left with her heels clicking sharply down my front walk. I'll be honest, her visit worked on me for about 6 hours. Renee came over with a bottle of wine and a plan involving posting every receipt publicly for the whole county to read. I sat with that idea for a long, satisfying, ugly moment. Then I let it go. If I did that, I'd simply be Vivian with better math. Theater is the Ashford family business. Mine has always been books that balance quietly, in private. Weeks later, my son sat across my kitchen table and made an offer, clearly rehearsed somewhere else first. Reverse everything, apologize publicly at the next family gathering, and I'd be welcomed back. Holidays, someday grandchildren, all of it. Everything I wanted, handed back to me, at the price of one public apology for something that had been done to me, in front of 200 guests, by his own wife. I said no, but I gave him real, fair terms, market rent or a genuine mortgage, an easy repayment schedule on the note, and the truth I'd been avoiding for 9 years. I paid for everything so I'd never have to find out if you'd stay without it. That was my lie, and it costs more than any house. I'm done being your bank. I will never stop being your mother. He told me I'd end up completely alone, that Chloe would never come back from this, that I'd chosen a house over my own family. I told him I'd rather be somebody's mother than somebody's money, and that my door would still be there, whenever he could finally tell the difference between the two. The winter that followed was long and very quiet, but in March, a thin envelope arrived, his handwriting unchanged since middle school. A check for $250. Memo line March. The very first payment he had ever made on that note, entirely on his own, out in the open, his own name signed beneath it. I deposited it exactly the way I'd handle any well-managed receivable, because that's what respect looks like, in the only language I really speak. That first Thanksgiving happened at Renee's. 12 people, paper napkins, a turkey she'd somehow overcooked into something closer to jerky, and more genuine laughter than I'd allowed myself in nearly 2 years. At one point, I missed my son so fiercely, I had to stand in Renee's bathroom with the fan running for a minute, and both things were true at once. I felt lighter than I had in a decade, and I ached like an open wound. Nobody warns you that getting your spine back comes with a full set of ribs attached, and every single one of them hurts for a while. The world did not applaud me either, and I think that's worth saying honestly. Chloe's wedding album went up online, beautifully lit, captioned as the best day of her life. I wasn't in a single photograph. A cousin on Walter's side stopped returning my calls after hearing Vivian's version of events secondhand. At church, a friend squeezed my arm hard enough to leave a small bruise, which, for women our age, is exactly how you say I know the truth, and I'm proud of you, without having to say any of it out loud. The house stayed occupied. Full market rent, $2,400, arrives by transfer on the 1st of every month now. No note, no memo line, nothing beyond what's required. It is the coldest money I have ever received, and somehow also the cleanest. Then a second envelope came that April. Memo line, just like the first. April. Beneath it, in his own handwriting, one more line. Tell Aunt Renee the shower toast story made Vivian's face do something.
It's a start.
I sat with that sentence at my kitchen table for a long time before I let myself smile. The envelope, the cashier's check, the forgiven note, the letter about the deed, sits in my safe deposit box now, right next to the deed itself. I never destroyed it. I want that understood clearly. The gift is still there. So is the door. Both remain open for whoever eventually decides to knock honestly. I turn 60 next year. And here's what I understand now that I didn't understand at table 11. If the only seat your family saves you is the one your money is sitting in, get up. You can give a family everything you have and never once send an invoice for it. And anyone who forgets that was never counting you as family in the first place, only counting on what you could provide. People sometimes ask if I'd do it all differently, knowing exactly how it ended. The honest answer is more complicated than a simple yes or no. I'd still pay for the funeral, the debt, the roof over my son's head, every single dollar of it, again, without hesitation. What I'd change is the silence surrounding it all. I'd ask plainly and out loud, years earlier than I did, does anyone here actually see me, or only the checking account standing quietly behind me? Because that question, asked early, costs so much less than the answer I finally received at table 11, delivered as a toast, in front of 200 witnesses. If you've ever quietly paid for a seat you weren't wanted at, tell me about it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you like stories about quiet women finally finding their spine, subscribe to Calm Drama Stories. I'll keep a seat open for you too.